Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all Yukoners for a fantastic summer. I was able to amass more than 18,000 kilometers traveling to every community in our great territory. To better serve our communities, I opened additional offices. I was honored to announce continued record levels of funding to multiple arts, cultural activities, celebrations, and festivals. Dealing with northern housing challenges by opening affordable housing units for seniors and independent living units for people with FASD to improve their quality of life and access to support. Investments in critical infrastructure and consulting with Yukon stakeholders for our path to the future. Investment in education, from literacy to innovation, to better place Yukon people for Yukon jobs. Supporting our youth career opportunities through 60 summer student job placements. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Watson Lakes Olympian Zach Bell and Team Alternatives Jean Lawson and Brittany Lavadure. Mr. Speaker, our Prime Minister understands how remarkable the people of Canada's true north are, and end with his quote, "Our country's greatest dreams are to be found in our highest of latitudes." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the mid-1970s, over 40 oil refineries operated in Canada. Today we have only 19. Burnaby is home to the last remaining major oil refinery in British Columbia. The Chevron refinery employs 250 people and provides 1/3 of Metro Vancouver's gasoline. This refinery gets its oil from Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline. Chevron may now close because it is being starved of feedstock. Chevron has applied to the National Energy Board to secure a guaranteed supply of oil from Kinder Morgan. I am intervening in the National Energy Board process to try and save the refinery while demanding it operate at the highest possible environmental standards. The Conservative chair of the Natural Resources Committee quipped to the Globe and Mail that he doesn't care if the refinery closes as long as it means more oil exports for Alberta. Mr. Speaker, I'm fighting to keep the Burnaby refinery open while making it cleaner. I'm fighting to keep 250 good-paying local jobs and keep gas prices low. What are the Conservatives doing, Mr. Speaker? Where is their national energy strategy?
Honourable Member for Mississauga, Brampton South.
It's been a busy summer in Mississauga. I spent it attending community events and meeting with residents and veterans and continuing to work hard on their behalf. It was especially wonderful to host over 2,000 of my neighbors at my annual community barbecue. Wow. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful volunteers who pitched in on a hot and sunny day to make it such a success. My community is hardworking, and it was wonderful to hear my neighbors speak of their continued support for our Conservative government's economic action plan to create jobs and keep taxes low. But I'm not the only one proud of our government's work and of our Prime Minister. The World Economic Forum has recognized the work of our government and has ranked Canada's banking system as the soundest in the world for the 5th year running.
Hear, hear, hear,
and it's not just our economy that's capturing international accolades. Former President Bill Clinton, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and retired General Colin Powell have honored our Prime Minister with the World Statesman of the Year Award for his international leadership, which will put him in the company of renowned leaders like former PM Margaret Thatcher. Congratulations, Prime Minister.
Well deserved.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the late Jim Jordan, who died Tuesday morning just 16 days after his 84th birthday. Mr. Jordan was the Member of Parliament for my riding of Leeds Grenville from 1988 to 1997. Jim, as he was affectionately known to everybody, was born into a political family. His father was a successful municipal politician in Hungerford Township. Of all his achievements as Member of Parliament, Jim may be best remembered for his tremendous efforts in convincing the government of the day to help finance a 4-lane highway stretching from Highway 401 at Prescott to Ottawa. That single achievement, Highway 416, has been a lasting and continuously growing economic benefit to both Ottawa and my riding, as well as making it much easier for many to commute to the city for work. On behalf of all members, I wish to express my condolences to his children, Dr. David, Bob, Paul, Tom, Mike, Dr. Andy, and Joe Jordan, who was the first son to directly succeed his father as an MP, and their families.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This summer, I was incredibly fortunate. I participated in the Atikamekw Nation's powwow in Manawan. This community north of Lanaudière welcomed me with open arms, and enabled me to discover both a rich culture and outstanding individuals. This community is dealing with chronic underfunding and astronomical dropout rates, and they've just suffered cuts of $430,000. Given all that, it's impressive how welcoming they were. This is one of the rare Aboriginal communities where the traditional language is still very widely spoken. Manawan, despite this, gets no financial support for its cultural programs. If language is the soul of a nation, are we going to wait for this language to be relegated to silence before we support it? This question and many others occurred to me during my visit, and I hope the government will have the decency to take note.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Richmond East.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that last night, C-42, the Enhancing RCMP Accountability Act, passed second reading. This bill will give the RCMP the tools it needs to enhance trust and restore accountability in its ranks. Mr. Speaker, the positive response to our government's proposed reforms has been heard loud and clear. This legislation is urgently needed. I was also pleased to hear that the NDP has stated they support this legislation. However, it seems they can't keep from playing some parliamentary games, even on bills they support. The member from Thunder Bay Rainy River read word for word the same speech as the NDP public safety critic had on the previous day. The NDP needs to get serious and work with our government to pass these very vital reforms.
Hear, hear, bravo. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives are looking for inefficiencies in public expenditure, they need to look no further than their own record. A bloated cabinet, more and more reliance on special advisors and ministerial officers, and get this, over $1 billion spent in the past 5 years on temporary help services for jobs that should be done by the full-time employees of the public service. You can't fire 184 professionals from Health Canada and expect no impact on public health. You can't cut air safety programs and expect no impact on security. When 900 workers are fired from Service Canada, that's 900 people who won't be there to service our seniors with their pensions. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. Good governance begins with a relationship of trust and respect between public servants, employees, and political leadership. Canadians deserve quality public services, and the professionals who provide them deserve our thanks and support.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader has an economic plan that's dangerous for Canadians. He wants to impose a job-killing carbon tax, which would increase the price of gas, hydro, and practically everything else. In the NDP platform on page 13, it clearly says, "We will put a price on carbon through a cap-and-trade system," which is the same thing as a carbon tax. Canadians made it clear in the last election they want a government that focuses on the economy, job creation, and prosperity. That's why they elected our Conservative government. We're going to remain focused on what matters to Canadians, keeping taxes low for families and job creators. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for York West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Canadian Embassy in Syria's webpage posted a warning which read, "Canadians who are leaving Syria by land into Lebanon should know that we advise against all travel to the border region." I applaud the Embassy for protecting Canadians in these border regions, but I wonder why other mechanisms of government are not equally mindful of the dangers. For example, residents of Syria, with a need for consular services from Canada, are required to travel through this war-ravaged territory to Amman, Jordan. Those engaged in the immigration process must make that perilous journey, often with young children and family, to our embassy before returning via the same treacherous route. Many have been threatened, some killed in the process, all for the sake of a face-to-face meeting. Canada should not be forcing people into dangerous situations like this. Allies, such as Australia as an example, are conducting immigration interviews by phone. Why is Canada not able to do the same and continues to put people at risk when other methods would accomplish the very same thing? Thank you.
The honourable member for Vegreville Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been hiding from answering the following straightforward question. Would the NDP impose a carbon tax? The answer they are so afraid to say out loud is yes, they would impose a carbon tax. The proof? Well, it's simple. It says it right in the party platform. It reads in black and white, they would generate $21 billion from this carbon tax. I asked the Leader of the NDP to finally come clean and admit it. The NDP want a carbon tax, a tax that will raise the price on everything, Mr. Speaker, including gas, electricity, and groceries. It's clear to me, Mr. Speaker, that Canadians don't want any part of the NDP's carbon tax scheme, and who can blame them? Mr. Speaker, our government will continue with its low tax plan for jobs and growth.
The Honourable Member for Notre-Dame de Grasse-Lachine. Mr. Speaker, instead of making things up with their overactive imaginations, you know what the Conservatives should do? They should stop twiddling their thumbs and do something to stop one of the worst fiascos of their government, the skyrocketing prices at the pump. Imagine, when Quebecers and Canadians go to fill up their tanks, they have to pay 36% more than 6 years ago. All that because of the irresponsible inaction of the Conservatives. A 36% increase, that means lots of sacrifices for families. They're not traveling as much, they're not spending as much on food, on clothes, on school supplies. They're having to deprive themselves of essential things in order to pay for this conservative hike in gas prices. Enough's enough. Instead of hot air, if my colleagues opposite have some political will left, they should deal with this problem that affects everyone all across the country. Thank you.
Mississauga, Streetsville.
Mr. Speaker, in a twist of contradictions, the NDP leader has begun attacking Canada's trade balance. He continues to spread false deficit numbers to mislead the Canadian public. He also fails to grasp the irony. If the NDP's reckless and irresponsible anti-trade agenda were imposed, Canada's trade would be zero. These policies, along with a new $20 billion carbon tax, would kill Canadian jobs and stall the economy. We encourage the NDP leader to read Andrew Coyne, who today wrote, "A country whose economy is growing relatively slowly compared to its trading partners will buy rather less from them and sell rather more. Its trade deficit will accordingly shrink. Conversely, a country that is growing quicker than its partners will experience an increase in its trade deficit." So pop quiz, which country would you rather live in? Sadly, it's the NDP policies.
Oral questions, questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Government House Leader said that employment insurance is used to encourage people to remain unemployed. The same type of message sent out by his colleague, the Minister of Human Resources, who finds that EI is too lucrative. Does the Prime Minister agree with his ministers? Is employment insurance, does it encourage people to stay on unemployment?
For people to be unemployed.
And the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, employment insurance is essential for Canadians who are unable to find work. And that is our objective, to ensure that all Canadians have the opportunity to find jobs.
Employment insurance worked was that anybody who went back to work lost dollar for dollar everything they gained when they returned to work. We're trying to make, for the vast majority of people, that's what happened. We're trying to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that Canadians can go back to work and continue to benefit.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's not true that the reason that 1,400,000 Canadians are unemployed is because they want to be unemployed. They have no jobs because of the current Conservatives' failure in economic policy. Policies like lowering taxes for big business, postponing retirement age, preventing workers from collecting employment insurance, or the Prime Minister's favorite example, importing temporary foreign workers. How do these policies help unemployed people find work? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know full well that in our country we have a superior record in terms of job creation for the unemployed. There are more Canadians working today than before the recession, and that is an exception with regard to developed countries. And we're going to continue to work to ensure job creation for Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister isn't interested in meeting with the Premiers. He isn't interested in working together. He isn't interested in the unemployed. He'll travel around the world, to Davos, to South America, to China, but he won't even sit down with Canadian Premiers. In 7 years, he's only met with the Premiers once, the worst record of any Prime Minister. Why won't the Prime Minister even listen to the people on the ground? Why won't the Prime Minister work together with his own fellow Canadians here at home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, on the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I have met in person or by telephone with Canadian Premiers 250 times since 2006. Not just with premiers, but with other Canadians on a regular basis. But what is interesting, Mr. Speaker, is actually the Leader of the Opposition, when asked about the fact certain premiers wanted to meet him earlier in the spring about his comments about shutting down Canadian industry and imposing carbon taxes, he said that he saw no reason he should meet with any of these premiers.
Order. The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
The Prime Minister continues to ignore the economic problems of Canadians, Mr. Speaker. The development of our natural resources is important for the economy, but the Minister responsible for the Nexen takeover by a Chinese government company has not said a single thing on the appalling record, human rights record, or its environmental record. Is it aware of these problems and the associated concerns? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry.
The investment review process is sound and ensures that foreign investment is of net benefit to Canada. Our government has a clear track record of encouraging economic growth, job creation and prosperity in Canada, and the Minister will take the time required to carefully examine the proposed acquisition to determine whether it's in the best interest of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know natural resources and the oil sands are an important part of Canada's economy. A Chinese state-owned company is now...
Order. 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 Members are once again asked to hold off on their applause until the member's finished asking the question. The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park has the floor.
The oil sands are an important part of Canada's economy. A Chinese state-owned company is now...
Order. The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park has the floor. Order.
A Chinese state-owned company is now trying to buy a major stake in the oil industry. Is it the Conservatives' plan to let other countries nationalize Canada's resources? Mr. Speaker, according to a new poll, only 8% of Canadians agree with this deal. 92% either disagree or want more information. Will the Minister of Industry acknowledge these concerns and agree to public consultation?
Here, here.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the 6 criteria that make up the net benefit test are very, very clear. Any Canadian, including the member opposite, can look them up online. It's in Section 20 of the Investment Canada Act. Simply Google Investment Canada Act and you'll be able to find those criteria. They include the level of economic activity, the degree and significance of participation by Canadians in the Canadian business, the effect on productivity, industrial efficiency, and other factors, the effect on competition within the industry. Mr. Speaker, it goes on and on. I don't have time to answer, to list them all. But, Mr. Speaker, let's just be very clear that the Minister will make the decision in the best interest of Canadians.
Honourable Member for Bourassa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question goes to the Prime Minister. Contrary to what he said earlier concerning EI reforms, we realize that the new measures are not advantageous for those who don't have as much money. We look at the first $75 or up to 40% of the first benefit. Now, automatically, the money is removed. Now, the problem is that that will create, that will damage people who are not as well off and an underground economy. Is that what the Prime Minister wants to create? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources. Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that regardless of what the workers do when they work, they will be better off. That is our objective. And we will continue to work towards that objective. This step we have taken is the first step, and we will continue to work to create a better system for these people. Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, either the minister is incompetent or else she is misleading the House. So I'm going to call on the Prime Minister because he's supposed to be the boss. The problem is when a person earns the money immediately, they are immediately stripped of 50% of that. So that person is going to have to hide in order to work. And so people are going to turn to the underground economy. That's not how it should work. The Prime Minister governs for all Canadians. Is he going to change his minister, or is he going to solve the problems once and for all to help the underprivileged in Canada? Honourable Minister of Human Resources. Mr. Speaker, under the former EI system created by the Liberals, when someone worked for 2 or 3 or 4 days a week, when they received benefits, they lost everything that they earned by working. So that did not make any sense. So, Mr. Speaker, that is what we are changing. We are removing 50 cents out of every dollar, so that's the right thing to do. Order. The Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker.
Une prestation maximale de 485 $. On pouvait garder 194 $. Maintenant que son nouveau système, elle paye 90.
Alors, il y a un problème avec la traduction. Est-ce qu'il y a un mourier?
Can the Honourable Member for Bourassa. So we understand why the Francophones now. Mr. Speaker, the problem currently is that people are losing more than they did under the old system, but I have a question for the Prime Minister.
Quote, providing for the poor is not a federal responsibility. Who said that? The Prime Minister. And now we are seeing his government abandoning the most vulnerable. EI recipient.
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
The changes we've made are to help Canadians to get part-time work, to make sure that there aren't barriers to that, because we know that getting part-time work often leads to full-time work. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that the vast majority of Canadians who are on EI, when they work part-time, they will be better off. Alors, Monsieur Président.
So, Mr. Speaker, the majority of the unemployed who work while receiving benefits will be better with the changes we have put in place, and we will continue to improve the system to help the unemployed.
For St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, in response to my order paper question, we discovered that the CF-18 pilots have shut down one of the jet's 2 engines in mid-flight 228 times since 1988 due to safety concerns. That's nearly once a month. 228 times our pilots got safely back to the base with the CF-18's other remaining engine. With the single-engine F-35, this scenario could have resulted in disaster. Do Conservatives understand this concern coming from experts in the field? Can they explain why they're ignoring concerns about choosing a single-engine aircraft?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, the National Fighter Procurement Secretariat is in place to ensure that there is due diligence and transparency in our decision to replace the CF-18s. It includes a number of experts, including 2 independent members, one being a very well-respected former Canadian Auditor General that's working with the Secretariat. No money has been spent on the purchase of any new fighter aircraft, and no money will be spent until the Secretariat independently verifies the cost and the requirements to replace our CF-18s.
The Honourable Member for Edith-Skamang. This is another example of the Conservatives' mismanagement in this file. Since 1988, our pilots have been saved by the CF-18's dual engine 228 times, 2 engines, so we can understand why the CF-18 was the right choice for our forces. It's a safety net that our pilots won't have with the Conservatives' F-35s. Can they explain why they want to purchase the F-35 when pilots won't have a second engine that could save them from disaster? The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
No money has been spent on the purchase of any new aircraft at this point, and the Secretariat is in fact in charge of not only looking at the cost to replace the CF-18, but also looking at the requirements to replace the CF-18. The Auditor General has told us that we are on the right track, that we're taking steps in the right direction. We are working with his office, and I thank all the officials, including the Department of National Defence, for working closely with the Auditor General's office.
The Honourable Member for Peaches, East York.
Well, Mr. Speaker, clearly the minister doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. Whether it's the math or physics that's missing from the minister's calculations, I don't know. But simply put, when you lose your only engine, you don't stay in the air. So rather than spending time and money on an F-35 Secretariat to decide whether or not the F-35 is better than the F-35, why doesn't the minister hold an open competition to decide what plane meets our national defense interests and the pilots that we ask to defend this nation?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, part of the National Fighter Procurement Secretariat is the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Air Force. And this Secretariat is in place to ensure there is full transparency and due diligence while we move forward to make a decision about replacing our CF-18s. At this point, no purchase has been made, and no money will be spent until the Secretariat reviews the costs associated with replacing the CF-18s and also the requirements necessary to replace the CF-18s.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, it is not only in the file of the F-35s that the Conservatives are not doing the job. 6 months ago, the Conservatives voted in favour of our motion, calling on the government to give more power to the Chief Electoral Officer. Time is running out. When will the government act?
The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Honourable Member to his new critic position. This is going to be a challenging position for him because it was his party, the NDP party, that had to return hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal donations from unions. It's going to be a challenging position for him. As for the motion, Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive proposal will be put forward shortly.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
The reality, Mr. Speaker, is New Democrats cooperated with Elections Canada, and in fact,
order. The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth has the floor. Shh. Order.
New Democrats cooperated with Elections Canada, and in fact were praised by Elections Canada for that cooperation. While Conservatives had to plead guilty to breaking election laws. Conservatives paid the largest fine available, and Conservatives wasted over $2 million taking Elections Canada to court. Now, so forgive me. The Minister of State says something will be tabled. Forgive me for not understanding that deadlines are there to be kept. This government promised to answer the committee.
The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I will say that a comprehensive proposal regarding that motion will be put forward in due course. But I want to remind the honourable member it was hundreds of thousands of dollars from their big union boss's sponsorship that was given to the union. They had to repay it. It was an illegal donation.
After they got fired.
The honourable member for Rosemont, that's Mr. Speaker. When it comes to ethics, the Conservatives are just a bad joke. while the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister takes calls from his lobbyist cronies as if this was perfectly normal, while the Minister of Industry is practically moving his office into the office of the Ethics Commissioner to save time, the government is promising changes to the conflict of interest legislation, but there's no details, nothing yet, nada. I can already hear the excuses that will be, the promises that will be broken. Why are the Conservatives afraid of tightening ethics rules? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport. We have already tightened the rules, Mr. Speaker. The problem is that the NDP have already broken these rules by accepting $340,000 from the unions. That was illegal. But I have a very specific question myself for the honourable member. He gave over $3,000 to Québec Solidaire, the most sovereigntist party in Quebec. Now, is he a federalist or not? The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, I would like to say 3 words in this House. In and out. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives can try their diversionary tactics all they want, but the facts remain, and they're troubling. People cannot trust a government that is embroiled in ethical scandals and mismanagement. The Minister of Industry alone is undermining the credibility of the entire government. He was caught red-handed in a conflict of interest by the Ethics Commissioner, who has launched 2 investigations in his regard. It is horrible. There is no credibility for this government on ethics. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I asked a pretty clear question. I said, is he now a federalist? And he responded, in and out. That raises a lot of interesting questions about his position on the country we live in and the parliament he serves in. Does he believe that his province should be in the country or out of the country? On this side, we're pretty clear. We want Quebec in. We believe in Canada.
Order. Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's pretty sad that he's using a maple leaf as a fig leaf to hide the ethical abuse of his government. So let's talk about the loopholes that they're refusing to clean up. Let's take the example of junkets, for example. You know, on the one hand, you have Liberals and Conservatives, I think even the member for Thunder Bay Superior, traveling on an expensive junket on a dime with a mining giant. On the other hand, an MP might take a phone call from, say, an environmental group. And yet, on the lobbyist registry, both those very different actions are treated the same. So it's not a question about the travel here. The question is about why will they not close the loopholes on this kind of backroom dealing?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
We've made clear, as indeed the NDP members of the committee have made clear, the Act is working well. We, of course, introduced this at the start of our term in government. There were some changes that were proposed. We've adopted many of those positions as our own positions, and we're doing further research on the others, Mr. Speaker. So we're acting in good faith. We want the Lobbying Act to be accountable. We want lobbyists to be accountable. We want there to be transparency. And I just wonder why the honourable member is so all roughed up, because we on this side of the House believe in Canada. And there's on that side of the House people that supported parties that did not believe in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we just asked a simple question.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Member would agree with me that there's never been a government that has set the ethical bar so low, and I will not even reference his time as a ShamWow salesman, but even with that low ethical bar, there's still an endless group of ministers and Tory staffers who are doing an endless conga line.
Order. 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 The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask him just a simple question. His friend Nigel Wright. Now, we all know Nigel Wright's a nice guy, but he gets lobbied not once, not twice, but 3 times by his buddies at Barrick Gold. So simple question. Does he think this is ethical, or does he think this passes the smell test? This is a simple question Canadians want an answer.
Bravo. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Simple answer. Yes, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister has comported himself with the highest standard of ethics. In fact, he's followed the Accountability Act, which increased the stringency of our lobbyist rules. That same act also banned explicitly union contributions. That party, over 5 years, accepted $340,000 in illegal union money. He mentioned sham wow. Their political financing is all sham and no wow.
The Honourable Member for Westmount, Ville-Marie.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the government for a separate bill on MP reform, pension reform, so that Canadians could see how their MPs support this very important bill in a standalone fashion. I didn't get an answer. Is the Prime Minister worried about a backlash from his own backbench if he doesn't force this down their throat as part of a single budget bill? I've got a proposition for him. How about a separate standalone bill, and the Liberals will cooperate in fast-tracking it? I think this is the kind of thing that Canadians expect, transparency from their government.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can inform the Honourable Member that we will not have a separate standalone bill when it comes to MP pensions or MP salaries, Mr. Speaker. We will have a budget implementation bill that is focused on jobs, focused on the economy, economic growth in this country, as we indicated previously. I'm not surprised that the Liberals on the other side, and indeed the NDP, have already voiced their opposition to this bill without even seeing the bill, Mr. Speaker. That's how they operate. But we're focused on jobs and economic growth for this country, and we will continue to be so.
Member for Malpet.
Mr. Speaker, does the Human Resources Minister just not know that prior to August 5th, EI claimants could earn 40% of their weekly benefits without any penalty? Take Jennifer, a registered nurse in my riding, on parental leave. Jennifer worked part-time to fill nursing care shortages and keep up her skills. However, the government now has clawed back 50 cents on every dollar earned, making her worse off with the changes. Will the Prime Minister explain to this new mum or on parental leave why he is taking half her wages for covering nursing shortages? Why is the government basically...
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, what the honourable member conveniently ignores is the rest of the story, and that is that if Jennifer had worked more than 40%, every single dollar that she earned, she would have been clawed back on her EI. That's a disincentive to work. Mr. Speaker, our country can't afford that. We have a shortage of skills and labour right across this country in a wide range of sectors, and industries, and professions. We want, as a government, to make sure that Canadians are always better off when they're working, and we're working towards that goal, and we'll continue to work towards that goal.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Mr. Speaker, the minister says, she wants to. This helps the majority of people. Let's talk about the majority of people. I don't mean an NDP majority of 50% plus one. The real majority. The basic math shows that anybody who makes $260 a week or under is penalized under these rule changes. Stats Canada figures show us that part-time workers, the median income is $230 a week. So that would tell me that EI workers that are working part-time, they're being penalized. When will she admit there's a problem and come and fix this problem? Because people are...
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you, and indeed all Canadians, that the vast majority of people who are working while they're on EI claim will now...
Order. The Honourable Minister has the floor. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of Canadians who are working on claim will indeed be better off. Mr. Speaker, that was our goal, to make sure that we have all the talent at work that we can get to, and we're working to connect Canadians with jobs. That's something the Liberals didn't do. We want to help. We will continue to improve the program so that our goals are achieved. But Mr. Speaker, quick quote for you. from the same member for Cape Breton Canso, I'm going to give the government kudos, what they're doing with Best 14 and working well on claim for two good provisions within that.
The honourable member for Sudbury. Mr. Speaker, the number of product safety tests conducted by Health Canada has plummeted by 57%. New Democrats worked hard at pushing this government to modernize legislation to protect consumers, and now they're doing less and less with it. Mr. Speaker, this government has to do a better job at protecting consumers. Is this incompetence or simply ambivalence to the health and safety of Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government took action to give Health Canada the modern tools necessary to remove unsafe products from the market. Thanks to Health Canada's work, we saw close to 250 dangerous products removed from Canadian shelves just last year. Health Canada further focuses on education and awareness with industry to prevent unsafe products from even making it into stores. We've always been on the side of Canadian families first. In fact, since we formed government, we've nearly doubled the amount of investment for consumer product safety. Too bad the opposition always votes against it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Quebec. Well, it's all fine and well to have this measure. However, if it's not applied, then what good is it? What we're seeing is fewer inspectors, fewer tests, and the fines are almost never imposed. So some companies are taking advantage of that, Mr. Speaker. They are playing with the safety of consumers. When will this government take up its responsibilities, increase the number of inspectors on the ground, and take the steps necessary to ensure that consumers are protected? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Is it all wrong? But I do appreciate the chance to highlight the great work of our government. Our government banned the manufacture and sale of any products that pose a danger to health and safety. Our government gave Health Canada the power to recall dangerous products. Our government created rules requiring industry to report serious incidents involving their products. Our record speaks for itself. We've always worked to protect the health and safety of Canadian families, and I hope that they get on board with us. Thank you.
Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, crucial negotiations continue this week on the Canada-EU trade deal, but Canadians are being kept in the dark. Provincial governments have been clear. They do not want higher drug costs downloaded onto their already stretched budgets, and seniors are worried they won't get the medications they need. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the minister said he's committed to openness and transparency. So I ask him again today, will he assure this House that any agreement with Europe will not increase the price of prescription drugs for Canadians in Canada?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has always sought to strike a balance between promoting innovation and job creation, while at the same time ensuring that Canadians do have access to reasonably priced and affordable drugs. We continue to consult with the provinces and territories to ensure that the interests of Canadians are reflected in our negotiations with the European Union. These negotiations have been and continue to be the most open and transparent negotiations Canada has ever undertaken. And let me again assure this House, we will only sign a trade agreement that is in the best interests of Canadians.
Well said. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a government can't refuse to answer questions and claim to be open and transparent. Mr. Speaker, this deal could really hurt Canadians and seniors, and a report released yesterday said that it could increase Ontario's drug costs by $1.2 billion a year. Mr. Speaker, we should be advancing Canada's interests in trade agreements, not pushing misguided policies that Canadians do not support. Let's have some real transparency from the Conservatives for a change. Will the Conservatives will Canadians face increases in drug costs from the European trade deal? A simple yes or no. Yes.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I would encourage that member not to prejudge the outcome of these negotiations. And again, let me emphasize that our government has always sought to strike a balance between promoting innovation and ensuring that Canadians do have affordable drugs available. And the prices charged for patented medicines sold in Canada are regulated by the Patent and Medicines Pricing Review Board. This will not change under a free trade agreement with the EU. Our government continues to consult with the provinces and territories to ensure that the best interests of Canadians are reflected in the Canada-EU trade negotiations.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga South.
Speaker, today in the GTA, the Finance Minister announced a major new positive infrastructure project to benefit GO Train commuters and the economy of the GTA. The project is great news for Toronto. Not only will it reduce congestion on our roads, it will create new jobs during construction and support hundreds of full-time jobs once completed. Can the Minister of State for Finance tell Parliament about how today's announcement on public-private partnership infrastructure projects will benefit taxpayers and the Canadian economy?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is committed to supporting infrastructure projects that create long-term economic growth and achieve value for taxpayers. Public-private partnerships achieve savings for taxpayers and improve the efficiency of projects by bringing in the private sector capital as well as expertise. Today, in the GTA, in Iqaluit and in Surrey, BC, our government announced major support for innovative infrastructure through public-private partnership projects that will improve infrastructure, build a stronger economy, and create better communities all across Canada.
Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, we were treated to a particularly evasive answer from the Minister about where he stands on the owner-operator fleet separation policy. He said then he's not advocating a particular position. But you know what? Fishermen certainly are. Members across the way have heard from thousands of fishermen throughout Eastern Canada and Quebec. I want to ask this Minister to clarify the uncertainty that exists throughout the East Coast and Quebec. Let us know here today, is the owner-operator fleet separation policy off the table or not?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite. Of course, the whole issue of owner-operator and fleet separation is a figment of the opposition's imagination. They're creating the crisis, Mr. Speaker. We engage with fishermen across this country and interested Canadians as to how we could seek a better fishery, how we could improve upon the fishery through reductions in red tape, those types of things, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to talk to fishermen across this country, Mr. Speaker, unlike the opposition. Thank you.
And the Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, tens of thousands of fishermen, not just on the East Coast, but across this country, have written to this minister and said that they support the owner-operator fleet separation policy because to get rid of it would devastate the inshore industry, would devastate coastal communities throughout Eastern Canada. And they want an answer from this minister. Are you going to stand with fishermen? Are you going to stand with coastal communities and support the owner-operator fleet separation policy?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, this side of the House has always stood on the side of fishermen, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to do so, unlike the opposition. Mr. Speaker, we've made unprecedented investments in the fishery, in our Coast Guard. We've repaired hundreds and hundreds of small craft harbours across this country that were left in disarray after previous governments. We'll continue to work with fishermen in the best interests of fishermen in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for New Westminster Coquitlam.
On this file, the minister seems to have great range. In one summer, he went from using consultations as an excuse to holding imaginary consultations. First, the Conservatives rammed through their devastating changes to the Fisheries Act, which even their former ministers agree will make Swiss cheese out of fish habitat protection. Then they promised to consult Canadians after the fact. Mr. Speaker, when will anyone be consulted, and when will the minister tell us who he's consulting and when he will actually hold public hearings?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to engage with fishermen and people in the fishing industry across this country. Mr. Speaker, the opposition has said that a lot of the changes that we're making are not good for habitat. We continue to believe that that is a false statement, Mr. Speaker. In fact, these changes will allow regulations to be made that prohibit the import, the transport, and the possession of live aquatic invasive species, amongst a host of other initiatives, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie-Les-Îles-de-la-Madeleine. Mr. Speaker, realising their mistake of having not consulted coastal communities, The Conservatives had promised, in a desperate and absurd gesture, to consult people after the fact, after having made changes to the Act. But there again, they didn't keep their promise. The people of Gaspésie deserve better, and so do people across the country. Will the minister ultimately listen to the people who will bear the brunt of this abandoning of the fish protection habitat, or are they simply too afraid of what they might hear?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, we made the legislative changes required to enter into our regulatory process. We are continuing that process. We'll be discussing this with people across the country, Mr. Speaker, various groups. We fully intend to do that and are in the process of making that happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner of the Environment said the government's approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions is unlikely to meet Canada's target for 2020. Today, there is a report that Arctic ice cover has melted to its lowest point since records began. Despite the government's new accounting and taking credit for the work of the provinces, what is the government doing to fix the huge deficiencies the Commissioner found in the government's ability to meet its climate commitments?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, my colleague is quite correct. The Canadian Ice Service, which is the foremost authority on the Arctic ice cap, has reported that this year it has diminished to record lows. With regards to our climate change policy and our reduction of greenhouse gases, I think my colleague must have missed our report just last month that reported that we are now more than 50% of the way to achieving our 2020 Copenhagen reduction target.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, an order paper response shows that pilots on the F-18 have been compelled to do emergency engine shutdowns on average 9 times per year. Among other reasons, it appears that birds and jets don't mix well. Good thing the F-18 has 2 engines. Since the minister has this single-minded fixation to acquire the single-engine F-35, will he be mandating special glide and ejection courses for the new F-35 pilots?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the member knows the National Fighter Procurement Secretariat has been set up to ensure full transparency and due diligence in the replacement of our CF-18s. And of course, on the Secretariat also sits members of the Defence Department and the Air Force. We also have 2 independent members, including a former very well-respected Canadian Auditor General. And they will be working on making sure that all of the steps to date have been independently verified, including the cost and the requirements to replace our CF-18s.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it looks like the Conservatives are making a habit of attacking retirement security. Now it's the public sector pension plan that's in their sights. And just months after the Conservatives' reckless attacks on OAS, they're moving step by step to cut pensions and raise the retirement age for Canadians. People are justifiably worried and wondering whose pension the Conservatives are coming after next. Mr. Speaker, is this government going to raise the age of retirement so that no one can collect a pension until age 67? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would think that from her previous life, the honourable member would know that no changes can be made to Canada Pension Plan without the consent of the provinces. She should remember that. But when it comes to old age security, we're the ones that are trying to ensure that there is indeed an old age security program there to support seniors when they need it. We're working on the long-term viability of it, and we will continue to do so for the sake of our seniors.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. The minister refuses to give a clear answer to a simple question. I'm having a sense of déjà vu here, and there's nothing reassuring about that. The Conservatives' plan is simple with respect to Canadians' pensions. First of all, they're slashing OAS. Now they're threatening to make significant cuts to the pension plans for public sector employees. What's going to happen next? Are they going to attack pension plans for all Canadians? The NDP won't let them get away with it, nor will the people of Canada. Can the minister tell us clearly if she intends to raise the retirement age? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member should know that no changes can be made to the Canada Pension Plan without the agreement of the provinces and territories. What we are doing as a government is ensuring that there will be an old age security system in the future for the long term for our seniors when they will need it.
For Leeds, Grenville.
Mr. Speaker, the policy of the NDP is to hurt Canadian families with a job-killing carbon tax.
Shame.
Will the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development tell the House of the government's latest measures to help Canadian families, particularly parents of critically ill children?
The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Leeds Grenville for his tireless efforts on this file. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to introduce in this House legislation that will provide financial support for the parents who are caring for a critically ill child or for a child who is missing or murdered. Sadly, last night, Mr. Speaker, the NDP voted against the Ways and Means motion that was required to introduce this bill. And my question, Mr. Speaker, is why are the NDP against helping families in their time of need?
The Honourable Member for St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government talks about strong, self-sufficient Aboriginal communities and actively undermines them. The Carcross-Tagish First Nation in the Yukon has successfully managed its own affairs since 2006. They need a new federal funding agreement by October the 1st, or this exemplary groundbreaking example of Aboriginal self-government will collapse. While in Carcross last month, the Prime Minister said he'd instruct his minister to intervene. Will the minister commit today to ensure that by October 1st, the Carcross-Tagish First Nation will have the money it needs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Indian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've successfully negotiated the renewal of financial transfer agreements with 10 of the 11 self-governing First Nations in the Yukon. Carcross-Tagish is the only First Nation to not have renewed their agreement. Canada has made a fair offer to the First Nation, and we urge the Chief to reconsider that offer. Mr. Speaker, our government remains ready and willing to work with the First Nation towards a renewed agreement.
For Western Arctic.
Mr. Speaker, the Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Minister handed 900,000 hectares of oil and gas rights in the Beaufort Sea to Franklin Petroleum. Owned by a husband and wife in England, last year Franklin had $220 in the bank and a corporate value of minus $32,000. It is unlikely that this company will do any work. These rights with a massive oil and gas potential can now be transferred to anyone by only sending a letter to the minister. Why did this minister fail to protect this valuable resource by exercising his authority under the law and... Good, great.
Secretary of the Ministry of Indian Affairs.
Another gotcha moment, I guess, from the member from Western Arctic. We know why he gets to ask questions from time to time, and that's because he voted against the interests of a critical mass of his constituents with respect to the long gun registry. He voted against funding for the Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to getting things done for Northern Canadians, whether it's regulatory frameworks, providing safe work areas for these folks, and ensuring that there's jobs for Northern Canadians, it's this side of the House that's getting it done, not that member.
Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, Americans who desert from their voluntary military service betray the trust of their country. When they come here and pretend to be refugees, they abuse the generosity of Canada. They waste tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayers' money and clog up the refugee system. They delay justice and protection for real refugees. They should be ashamed of their dishonourable conduct. Can the government update the House on the latest U.S. deserter who entered Canada under false pretense?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm standing and rising to inform the House that U.S. military deserter Kimberly Rivera has been removed from Canada and is now back in the United States. Our government, Mr. Speaker, our government does not believe that the administration of the President or the President himself in any way, shape or form is going to persecute Ms. Rivera. In fact, she's had every opportunity in this country, despite the fact that not one of the applications from an American war deserter has been successful in Canada. Each and every one of them has been upheld by the federal court in terms of the Immigration and Refugee Board denying them It's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to make sure we can.
The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Food banks across Canada are busier than ever. In Ottawa alone, the use of food banks is up between 6 and 8% just over last year. Food prices are on the rise, household debt is at an all-time high, low and middle-income families have to work more hours just to get by. When will this government realize that Canadians are struggling and finally take concrete steps to help them make ends meet?
Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
And Mr. Speaker, you've been doing exactly that for the last 6 years, and every single thing we brought forward to help Canadians who are facing tough financial times has been voted against by the NDP. Mr. Speaker, let's face it, whether it's introducing the working income tax benefit to help people get over the welfare wall, increasing the amount that seniors are allowed to be exempt from the guaranteed income supplement, increasing the GIS by its largest amount in decades, the NDP vote against it every time. Their hypocrisy is quite frankly breathtaking.
The member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government has given us the largest trade deficit and the largest budget deficit in Canadian history. Stalled economic growth. Unemployment well over 8%. Youth unemployment doubled that. Now the communist Chinese are allowed to scoop our key resources. 1.4 million unemployed people from St. John's to Thunder Bay to Bella Coola want to know, when will this Prime Minister rethink his failed economic policies?
And the Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I understand this Prime Minister is actually going to New York to receive an award for his exemplary leadership around the world, Mr. Speaker. Not only at home, but around the world. Mr. Speaker, the policies that this government have put in place have helped businesses employ over 770,000 Canadians that were not employed before the recession, Mr. Speaker. Our banks are the strongest. They've been noted as being the strongest for the 5th year in a row by the World Economic Forum, Mr. Speaker. Don't talk down.
That brings question period to a close. I'll hear the point of order before we move on to the Thursday question. The honourable member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period today, I'd like to give my honourable colleague from across the way, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, an opportunity to correct an inaccuracy. I know that they've been making up facts this week, but what he doesn't realize is that in the last
Order. Members know that a debate over to the facts is, as to the facts is not a point of order, and encourage the honourable member for Sudbury to maybe bring it up in a different question period. With full confidence that this is actually a point of order, not a point of debate, I'll recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the unanimous consent of the House to table